The Positive Theory of Capital by Eugen von Bohm-Bawerk. Book 6. The Source of Interest. Chapter 8. Interest from Durable Goods, continued. To proceed, the phenomenon of interest just explained is characteristic of all durable goods, consumption and production goods alike, but in the case of production goods, there comes in one circumstance the influence of which has to be investigated. In goods which are to serve as instruments of production, not only are the future services remote from the present, but both present and future services are remote from that economical goal which is first to be reached through production. The final destination from which, according to principles with which we are now familiar, they derive their value, is the product obtainable from them in the future. But from the attainment of this goal, the current service, even that service in the very act of realization, is distant by the whole production period which must intervene between its incorporation in the process of the turning out of the finished product. If this period, for instance, amounts to 2 years, the current service is 2 years away from attaining its goal, and at the same time from attaining its full present value. The next year's service is 3 years away, the next again 4 years, and so on, while in the case of durable consumption goods, every service attains its full present value, in the year or in the moment it is rendered. Now this has a twofold result. First, the services of productive goods undergo a greater reduction as compared with their full final value, and second, the growth of their value lasts longer on that account. After they are produced and set to work, they bear interest during the whole period of the production process on which they enter, only in practice this interest is ascribed, not to the durable good that forms an integral part of the outlay, from which indeed it is now separated, but to the business or circulating capital into which it is transferred at the moment of its separation. To illustrate this, a durable consumption good which lasts 6 years, and yields at the end of each year a use of 100, is worth, as we have seen, 95.23 plus 90.70 plus 86.38 plus 82.27 plus 78.35 plus 74.62, which equals 507.55. A durable productive good, on the other hand, which lasts 6 years and whose use affords a final utility of 100 after a further production period of 2 years, has the following value: its current year's use, which is first obtained by the end of the year, and then brings in the amount of 100 after 2 years more, that is, after 3 years in all, is only worth in present valuation 86.38. Its next year's use, which will bring in 100 in 4 years, is today worth 82.27. Similarly, the third year's use has a present value of 78.35, the fourth year's a value of 74.62, the fifth a value of 71.06, and finally the sixth has a value of 67.68. The whole productive good, accordingly, has a value of 460.36. At the end of the first year's use the first service is detached. This, meanwhile, has come nearer to its final goal by a year, and accordingly advances in value from 86.38 to 90.70. The other services follow suit in the usual way. Thus the good, as still bearer of the 5 prospective services of the individual values of 86.38 plus 82.27 plus 78.35 plus 74.62 plus 71.06, is now worth in all 392.68. It has therefore lost 67.68 in the course of a year's use, and as against the return of 90.70 represented by the service detached, has borne 23.02 of interest, exactly 5% on the initial value of 460.36. So far everything runs as before. But the service which was separated off with the value of 90.70 neither remains in its former shape, nor remains its former value. It is detached from the fixed capital, and it has passed over into the circulating capital, where it remains incorporated in some or other of the intermediate products, say in the yarn spun by machines. In this new shape it is the object of the further production process, and is by it brought step by step nearer to full maturity, and so to its future value of 100. This it attains in the following, the second year of use. At the end of the second year's use again, the service, which is now the current one, is detached from the parent good with a value of 90.70. The parent good, now valued at 321.62, has lost 71.06 and, as against the return of 90.70, has borne 19.64 as interest. But during the same year, the service detached in the previous year and incorporated in the circulating capital has risen from 90.70 to 95.23 in value, and bears another 4.53 of interest. And again, in the same way, at the end of the third year of use, a service of the then value of 90.70 is detached, by which the parent good loses 74.62 in value, and interest gains 16.08. But since simultaneously the service detached 2 years before and incorporated in the circulating capital increases from 95.23 to its full value of 100, and that detached 1 year before from 90.70 to 95.23, there is a further gain in interest from 4.77 plus 4.53, that is, of 9.3. In this way the peculiar combination of circumstances in durable productive goods gives occasion to a twofold interest relation. The services already detached bear interest after the manner, and as integral part of the circulating capital, that is, their claim or title to interest is based on their transformation into finished and final product. The services still contained in the good bear interest after the manner of durable consumption goods, that is, their claim is based simply on their approximation to the present. But of these two elements of the interest return, only the second is formally ascribed to the parent good from which it springs. For it the calculation is concluded at the moment in which the individual service is detached, and with the value which it then has. What further happens with it is ascribed to the circulating capital into which it passes at the moment of its separation. And thus we come to the final result. All interest borne by durable productive goods is borne by them simply in their character of durable goods, while their second property, that of being productive, only comes into play in the interest borne by the services already detached and transferred to circulating capital. In this lies the complete explanation of a developed interest phenomenon, which I before suggested but had to delay going fully into until now. There is still, however, another highly important explanation we may gather in passing. In goods capable of only a moderate number of services, the contraction of value, even in the case of the last services, is but small. The result of this, on the one hand, that the value of the parent good is only a little behind the gradually developing value of its collective services. In our first example, the value of the machine lasting 6 years was not quite 600, but still it was over 500, and on the other hand, that the amount of wear and tear, even in the first year, is relatively high, and almost equal to the entire value of the current service. In our illustration, the value of the current service was 100, the value of the last service, that which decides the wear and tear, about 78. In goods again capable of a very long series of services, both the value of the parent good and the amount of wear and tear fall proportionately. A good capable of rendering services of the annual value of 100 for 100 years is very far from being valued at 100 times 100, which is 10,000. At most, where the usual undervaluation of future goods is at the rate of 5%, it is worth 2,000, and the loss of value in the course of the first year's use, although a service worth 100 has been consumed and detached from the use content of the good, is not 100 but 76. That and no more being the present value, at a discount rate of 5% per annum, of a sum of 100 falling due in 100 years. Finally, if a good is capable of rendering not only a great many, but practically an infinite number of services, the phenomenon just mentioned is seen in full development. The present value of the parent good is infinitely less than the successively increasing value of its services. A piece of land, for instance, which bears 100 pounds each year for an infinite series of years, is worth not 100 times infinity, not 100,000 pounds, not even 10,000 pounds, but only some 2,000 pounds. And its loss of value sinks to zero. The piece of land whose annual current service is worth 100 pounds yields the whole 100 pound net. The law remains just as before, but the very remote services of the second, third, 10th century have so exceedingly small a value in the present that they can add almost nothing to the present value of the land. And the last service, the one which should decide the amount of depreciation as infinitely far away, has no present value at all. This is the ultimate reason why rent of land appears as a net income, and here first is the solution of the problem of rent traced to its real issue. The old rent theory gave only a preliminary and partial answer, and strangely enough had not the slightest suspicion that its tentative solutions had never come near the heart of the problem. All preceding attempts from Ricardo downwards exhausted themselves in more or less successfully pointing out that the annual uses of land have an economic value, or yield an economic return, and why they do so. But the yield of such services is in itself, first of all, a gross return. That the owner gets a net return and net income has nothing to do with the fruitfulness, situation, kind of ground, or any such thing, but simply with the lower value put upon future goods, and the determination of the present value of the land in conformity with that. Suppose that a quarry, after deduction of all other recognized costs, produced for 100 years what we may call net annual return of £100, and suppose that future services were not less valued than present. The value of the quarry would be the full amount 100 times 100. The quarry owner would draw an annual income of £100, but not a shilling of that would be rent in the present sense of that term. That is to say, a net income, the whole of it would be a protracted consumption of the parent wealth of £10,000. And the case of all other lands is different from that of the quarry, not in kind but only in degree. If a field is considered capable of producing crop for 1,000 years or 2,000 years, if one should prefer it for literal infinity in human affairs, is out of court. And if the future crops are to be valued as highly as the present ones, the valuation put upon such a field will reach an exorbitant height, which is 100,000 or 200,000 pounds, and the yearly rent of 100 pounds will present the character of a breaking off of the parent stem of wealth, a very gradual destruction of the stem, but still a destruction, not a net income. Landowners would be lords of a giant stem or stock of wealth, but they would have no net income. The theoretical explanation of rent from land then coincides ultimately with the explanation of interest obtained from durable concrete capital, and land rent is nothing but a special case of interest obtained from durable goods. That the two explanations do not entirely coincide, and that on the contrary the current rent theories are substantially so very different from the interest theories, is only traceable to the fact that in the course of the explanation of rent, an intercalation had to be made which did not require to be made in the case of interest on durable capital, and that at the same time, from a faulty conception of the rent problem, economists exhausted the whole content of the rent theories in making this special intercalation. In the case of all products of labor, and consequently in all goods that constitute capital, it needs no explanation that they and their material services have economic value. Were it not so, they would be produced. In the case of the services of land, on the other hand, this is not self-evident, and therefore the economist must first exert himself to show why and under what circumstances the use of land receives a value and price. With a correct value theory a few strokes of a pen will supply this proof, by means of the doctrines of marginal utility and of complementary goods. Wanting the guidance of such a theory, and entangled in the fetters of the labor value theory, economists gave it a shape which was unnecessarily circumstantial and clumsy, and was at the same time not very satisfactory in principle. Of Ricardo's rent theory, which in essence has remained the ruling one up till the present day, the theories of his opponents Carey and Rodbertus being quite exploded, it must be said that it contains an abundance of truth put in a formula essentially false. It is a brilliant piece of casuistry, which is out of connection with the central fire of correct principles. It lights up a bit of the road, but leaves the rest in obscurity and error. Hence the peculiar fate of the Ricardian theory. It does not quite satisfy anybody. Even its friends are fain to discover a number of weak points in it, and its most universal propositions are, for the most part, its weakest. but there remains an indestructible core of truth which lives on under the most varied metamorphoses, and, even to this day, constitutes the better part of its substance. But how far does the Ricardian or any other rent theory take us, even if it were correct in every point where it is disputable? It takes us no further than we get in the question of interest, when it has been shown that a threshing machine, after deducting all other costs, yields an annual gross interest, and why it does so. Where Ricardo ends his rent theory, there in truth ends the intercalation, which, because of its obviousness, did not require to be made in the case of movable capital. But it is just then that the chief question of the problem suggests itself, why there is a net interest within that gross interest which is yielded by the year's use or service of the threshing machine, or the field, after deduction of the other costs. And to this question, which the rent theory up till now has entirely omitted to put, no answer can be given, either as regards the field or the machine, but to the point to the undervaluation of future goods and future services.